Okay, so let's begin today's class with a quick revision of where we left in the last class, I think. Okay, so Rabia, would you like to give a quick summary today? I think it has been Iram from last couple of classes. So what about you? I think we started with the hormonal regulation in females and then did the oogenesis, right? How about a quick summary, Rabia? Just what you understand, and nothing much in detail. If you find difficulty at any point of time, I will be there. Even Iram can help. Yes. Rabia, you're not audible to me. Iram, can you hear Rabia?
So actually, I don't know. I think my internet is unstable. Not able to hear you as well.
I can
My voice
hear
is cracking.
you. My voice is cracking.
Yeah, it's for me.
Rabia, what about you? Am I audible clearly and visible clearly to you, or is my voice cracking for you as well? I can't hear Rabia actually. Rabia, would you like to reconnect? We'll just wait for you. Quickly reconnect. Okay, Iram, am I audible and visible to you clearly?
Yes, sir. No, it's okay.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we'll wait for Rabia. In the meantime, do you have any question, Iram? Any doubts? Okay, Rabia has joined. Hello, Rabia.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, perfect. We can hear you. Great. Let's go with a quick revision. And also, I wanted to inform you that soon your classes are going to be extended to 1.5 hours. And that will give us more opportunity to discuss and cover, in one class, like per class. So just it's a time to pick up some pace. As I told you, there are less chapters in 12th, but there are more concepts to be prepared for entrances. Okay, yes, Rabia, let's start with a quick revision of hormonal regulation in female reproductive system.
Yes, sir. In hormone regulation in females, hypothalamus secretes GnRH that stimulates the pituitary gland that releases the gonadotropins, that is FSH, that completes the oogenesis, and LH, luteinizing hormone, which is responsible for the secretion of ovarian hormone that are estrogen and progesterone. We also discussed about the secondary sexual characteristics in females. First one is high-pitched voice or shrill voice. Second one is widening of hip girdle. Third one is development of the mammary gland, and the milk that is formed is called colostrum. The fourth one is the menstrual cycle begins. We also discussed about menarche and menopause.
What is menarche? Yeah.
The start of the menstrual cycle is called menarche, and the pause of menstrual cycle is called menopause.
Yeah.
Fifth one, pubic hair grows or develops. And sixth one is height. It shoots up. There's growth in height. And seventh one is sweat and sebaceous gland develops. We also wrote a question. Why do females have only a specific time period for reproducing, whereas it is not the same for men?
Yeah.
It is because of the menstrual cycle. Because
No,
of
but
the
the question
menstrual
is,
cycle.
why is menstrual cycle like that? Menstrual cycle is the mark of, it's the way to say that a female is in the reproductive age. Yes. So the reason was why. Yes. I think you are getting to the answer. Yeah. Continue.
Well, sir, I only wrote that answer. It is due to the menstrual cycle.
Yeah. So menstrual cycle is a reason, but what about menstrual cycle? If you write that it is due to menstrual cycle, it could be 100 things due to menstrual cycle. But what does menstrual cycle do, because of which a female cannot stay like reproductively viable throughout her age, throughout her lifespan? Iram, would like to help Rabia here?
Is it because the
Mhm.
flow of blood during
Yes.
the
So
menstrual cycle?
yes, correct. So what happens with flow of blood?
Uh, um, During the menstrual cycle, there is loss of blood. So
Mhm.
by the time a woman reaches the age um, around 60 or 50, she
Mhm.
cannot handle that loss of blood. Like it was.
Correct. So you can just in a one line write down that the loss of blood and tissues during menstruation takes a heavy toll on female physiology. Okay. And so you can imagine, right, if every month a reproductively viable female is, or sexually mature female is losing quite a significant amount of blood, then before next month, when the uterus again goes through the same cycle, the female also have to regenerate, right, reform those lost blood cells, tissues, energy, etc. Is it not?
Yes,
Female
sir.
cannot keep losing blood. No, there is no unlimited supply, right? So it is very energy taking, toll taking, heavy on physiology. So it's like a female system is constantly under the pressure of forming more and more and more blood cells, which a male system is not, by the way. So that's where after a certain age it becomes difficult for the female physiology to continue losing the blood and forming again back everything and then losing it again. Yeah, that's one of the reasons. Another reason is that this hormonal regulation that we talked about. Yes, so you continue with your summary quickly, Rabia.
Yes, then we also discussed that estrogen and progesterone acts on the uterus and the uterine hormone are secreted. Then we also discussed about fertilization, that is oogenesis. It begins in the embryonic stage. In that, the PGCs, which are diploid, go through mitotic division to give oogonium, which are also haploid that undergoes
Diploid.
my
They are diploid. We never see a haploid cell in the female gonad until the gonads reach puberty,
okay.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Oogonia, which are diploid, they undergo mitotic division to give primary oocytes, which are also diploid. Now, the primary oocytes, they undergo meiotic division 1 and give secondary oocytes.
No,
The
but before
primary
that, a lot of
oocytes
things are
are,
happening. The primary oocytes get arrested at prophase before
yes,
birth, right? Yeah. So you missed this part. What is this about? Are you clear with this part of the story? From before birth till puberty, what's happening in between?
sir,
Yes,
can you repeat?
yes. My question is what is happening before birth and after birth till the female reaches puberty? Do you have any doubts in this part of the process? Am I not audible clearly?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Okay. Yeah. What is atresia? What happens at birth? What happens before birth? What happens from birth to puberty to these oocytes? And what happens at puberty? I think I have not dictated you these things, right? Okay.
You have.
Yeah, I have, Iram. So yeah, would you like to help Rabia here?
Yeah, so wait, just wait.
Yeah. So we'll discuss this because it's important. And if you have any doubt, we'll clear it first and then move forward. Yes,
Yeah,
Iram.
so PGC make oogonia going through mitosis, and oogonia form primary oocyte again through mitosis. They undergo mitosis, meiosis, mitotic division. All the primary oocytes get arrested at prophase 1. That phase is what
Yeah,
we
this
call
is
as
meiotic
atresia.
division, not mitotic.
Yeah, meiotic division,
Yeah.
sorry.
Mhm.
It's before birth. Atresia is a constant degeneration of primary oocyte before and around birth. At the time of birth, each ovary contains around 60,000 to 80,000 primary oocytes.
Correct. Right. And would you like to continue then? And what happens at puberty? Iram?
So sorry, sir, I don't clearly remember this.
Okay, no problem. So I'll take forward from here. So the story is clear till here, right? Atresia is the phase where a large scale degeneration takes place, and at puberty, which is around 9 to 11 years of age in females, the primary oocyte comes out from the arrested phase. Now, when we say arrested, it is not like they are put behind the bars, kind of arrested, or here we are talking about a cell. So we are talking about metabolic arrest. Okay, so they are arrested metabolically. Okay, and they are arrested at prophase 1. So they don't move. Anything doesn't happen inside the cell apart from just keeping the cell alive. And then once they reach puberty, they come out of that metabolic arrest and complete the meiosis 1 first. And as a result of meiosis 1 completing, from one primary oocyte, two daughter cells are formed. Now, these two daughter cells normally should have been uh, equal, two equal cells, right? Two secondary oocytes. But instead, what happens? One cell becomes the first polar body, which is a very, very small, tiny cell which degenerates later on. This polar body does not have cytoplasm or has minimal, like very, very minimalistic cytoplasm. Cell organelles are not present. Most of them are not present in this, and just the nucleus is present. Whereas the secondary oocyte is a big cell. It has lots of cytoplasm, other cell organelles like mitochondria, ribosomes, etc., and also the nucleus. So both polar body and the secondary oocyte both are haploid, but polar body's journey end here. It degenerates and it's out of existence. Secondary oocyte continues. Now this secondary oocyte, remember, it has one more meiosis cycle to complete, which is meiosis 2. So meiosis has not yet complete. One cycle is not completed because in one cycle there are two subcycles, meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. So this further has to divide, that is for sure. But this division of secondary oocyte forming a fully mature ovum does not happen in the ovary. Okay, because at this stage it is released from the ovary, and once it is released, let me erase this and write it here. So this is released from the ovary, and then it completes its meiosis 2 in the fallopian tube, or we call it the oviduct. Okay, is it clear, both of you?
Yes, sir.
And this requires signaling from the sperm. So the spermatozoa has to come and touch the membrane that initiates a whole cascade of signaling in the oocyte, and that oocyte, the division completes of meiosis 2, and as a result of meiosis 2, again there will be two cells. One will be the ovum, which is the functional haploid gamete. This is the functional female gamete. And the second, as you can guess very well, will be called the second polar body. But here is a catch. The second polar body is formed inside the fallopian tube. Okay, and when this secondary oocyte is released, remember I told you it has layers around it. Yeah, that's called follicular layers. We call it zona pellucida and zona corona radiata. So those layers, so let's say this is the secondary oocyte. Above that is the layers, multiple layers that protect the secondary oocyte. Now when this secondary oocyte, this is divides to form ovum, so a small part, there will be a small cell that will become the polar body, and this bigger cell will become ovum. Do you understand? The division is unequal. Is it clear, everyone?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Now sperm comes and it comes and fuses with this cell. Okay, so what happens to this part here, this second polar body? Second polar body never goes away, never goes out to degenerate, never gets separated from the ovum. It stays there inside the same layers of protection, ultimately degenerates. But when second polar body is formed, it is formed right there within the same layer. When fertilization happens, then also the polar body is right there, sitting at a corner in that whole encapsulation, and it also travels some distance along with the fertilized zygote, and then eventually degenerates before or around the time this embryo implants in the uterus wall. Is that clear? Now the question that is associated with this, that has been asked in entrance, is this: where is secondary polar body formed in a human reproductive system? Write down this question. Where is secondary polar body formed in a human, in a female reproductive system? Options will be ovary, oviduct, uterus, or let's say cervix. What will you select? Yes, Iram?
So the options again, please.
Ovary, oviduct, uterus, or cervix?
Ovary.
No, it's oviduct. Again, that's what I'm saying. Second polar body cannot be formed in the ovary, because before that, at this stage, at the stage of secondary oocyte, it is released from the ovary. So the secondary oocyte is no longer in the ovary when second polar body is formed. Secondary oocyte goes out of the ovary, gets caught by the infundibulum, goes inside the fallopian tube, sperm comes, touches the secondary oocyte, then meiosis 2 completes, and then ovum and second polar body is formed in the fallopian tube only. Sperm fuses with ovum, makes zygote, secondary polar body degenerates over time. So first polar body is formed inside the ovaries, but second polar body is formed outside the ovaries, inside the fallopian tube or oviduct. Is that clear? This is what students don't pay attention to. Even some teachers don't pay attention to while teaching this whole cycle. So points like these are the hot sections from where your entrance questions comes, because these are facts we often don't pay attention to but are very important. So again, my question is, where does second polar body formed? Ovaries, oviduct, uterus, cervix.
Oviduct.
Perfect. Write it down. So oogenesis is not that straightforward like spermatogenesis. Spermatogenesis was very classical, straightforward. From one, primary oocytes, there'll be two secondary, one primary spermatocyte, there'll be two secondary spermatocyte, and from two secondary spermatocytes, there'll be four spermatids. Then they will develop a tail and becomes fully mature sperm. End of the story. There, the only catch is that structural maturity and functional maturity takes place in two different places. Structural maturity takes place in the seminiferous tubules, and for functional maturity of sperms, they have to go and stay in a camp and go through the training, you can say, in epididymis. Here the catch is that it's slightly convoluted, not very straightforward. So let's go through Genesis once again, and please pay attention to every point, and if you have any doubt, please ask. So again, we begin with PGCs, just like male system. PGCs are diploid. They divide through mitosis, form oogonium, just like spermatogonium, which are again diploid. And oogonium is present in huge numbers in the ovaries. Oogoniums also divide mitotically, mitosis division, to form primary oocytes. Again, they are diploid. Till here, everything is same as it was in the spermatogenesis. So primary oocytes are the cells which for the first time will go into meiosis. But the problem here is the moment they start meiosis, at the very first stage, at prophase 1 of meiosis 1, they get metabolically arrested. And the story pauses for some time. The female child takes birth, and around that period, there is a period of atresia before birth, which leads to huge number of degeneration of these primary oocytes. So at the time of birth, around 80,000 primary oocytes, which are arrested at prophase 1, are left in each ovary of the female. Nothing happens from birth till puberty. Everything stays as it is, and nothing divides. But in fact, few more degenerates along the way in these 10 to 11 years. So whatever primary oocytes are left, which are again in thousands, 60 to 80,000, they come out of that arrested phase and completes meiosis 1 and form two cells. Now here, it's not that straightforward. They do not form two secondary oocytes from one primary oocyte. Instead, they form one polar body, which is a very tiny cytoplasm and organelle-less cell kind of, and it degenerates, and one secondary oocyte that is released from the ovary. Now the story of that oocyte in the ovary ends. It comes out of the ovary, gets caught by infundibulum, enters the fallopian tube. That is where it completes its meiosis 2 in the oviduct, and again one polar body, which is called second polar body, and a ovum is formed. Is that clear? And this ovum is the functional gamete, and it fuses with sperm to make zygote. Okay, and then zygote becomes embryo and gets implanted in the uterus wall. Any doubts till here, Rabia and Iram?
Yes, clear.
Clear? Okay, perfect. So write down homework here only. What you have to do is you have to read from my notes from NCERT. Then on your own, you have to draw this schematic. Okay. Draw the detailed schematic, as much detail as you can write. Okay. Now how you are going to write it is on you. Draw a detailed schematic flowchart of oogenesis. Take a A4 size sheet, draw this, send me as an assignment and picture, and you can stick it at your work study place or workspace. Okay, because questions are for sure going to come from oogenesis and spermatogenesis. Together they both are called gametogenesis, the unit. So be ready, questions do come from gametogenesis. Okay. Okay, let's move forward. So no doubt.
I have a
Yes.
question regarding the previous topic.
Yes,
Yeah.
Hiram,
Okay.
please.
So like we discussed about the secondary sexual male characters. One of them was the effect of testosterone, right? Testosterone will lead to the production of beards and mustache and those things.
Correct.
But in females, it won't happen because we don't have like testosterone. A less amount of testosterone is there.
Yeah, almost negligible or trace amount of testosterone. So according to NCERT, like at this level, when they teach you the things, they want you to learn the determinants. So the determinant is that males have testosterone, females have estrogen. But biology is not black and white; it's always gray, right? There is some amount of estrogen also present in males in a different form called estradiol, which is important for brain development during early childhood. There is also some amount of testosterone present in female, and in fact that amount gets increased in female athletes when they are on training.
Yes.
Yeah, so yeah,
So like the testosterone will lead to the formation of beard and all. But like in female athletes, if the testosterone is increasing, then definitely I think they should. This might sound
definitely there should
absurd.
be some. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're right. It's a very very valid question, but because this question can only come to your mind if you know that female athletes do have some amount of testosterone level, but still a female athlete will not have a testosterone level as high as a normal non-athlete male will have. Okay, because the primary source to produce testosterone is Leydig cells, which are not present in female system. So in female system, when testosterone is formed, it is formed not through the Leydig cells, but some similar kind of pathways happening in other kind of cells. That level is never as high as it is in males to be enough to give all characteristics like beard, mustache, and all, right? But one thing it does help female athletes is with musculature and strength. You will see female athletes having more muscles and strength than a normal female, right?
Yes.
Do you understand? Yes. So it helps there in their training, endurance, muscles, and strength. But it's not so high to be enough to give them facial hair like beard and mustache. So athlete, if a female athlete is training very hard, she will not become male and she will not have beard and mustache coming up. But she will for sure have some muscle build up, because boxers, athletes, weightlifters, those cricketers, footballers, those who have been females, have better strength, right? Yeah. Yes. So, but again, the bottom line is, even if in a female athlete you will check the testosterone level, it will not match even a normal non-athlete male. Okay, is that clear, Iram? Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Why athletes won't get mustache and beard? Female athletes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, so let's move forward. And so spermatogenesis and oogenesis clear. So after that, let's go to the ovarian first menstrual cycle. Let's first talk about the menstrual cycle. Okay, not green. Menstrual cycle. Now there are certain, before we talk about menstrual cycle, let me also tell you certain things. Menstrual cycle is a characteristic feature of primates, like humans especially, and there, so this cycle happens in other mammals as well, but in other mammals like cows, you will never see a cow, a buffalo, a cat, or a dog, or a horse, like a mare, sorry, going through a menstrual cycle, right? So they do not undergo this um, monthly bleeding out phase, but for sure there is a cycle in their bodies as well, and that cycle is called estrous cycle. So estrous cycle is present in non-primate mammals. Primates are the one who are bipedal mammals like humans. Humans undergo menstrual cycle, human females. Non-primate mammals like cows, dogs, cats, they undergo estrous cycle. Now that is also a monthly cycle. The only difference is that in estrous cycle there is no bleeding phase. Okay, no bleeding phase. So what happens? Actually, in there also, they also have uterus, right? You know that? So the physiology is very, very similar. For example, rats also have uterus. They also give birth like humans give birth. And they also have birth canal, vagina, cervix, uterus. But what happens is uh, the amount of hormonal regulation, it varies. And secondly, whatever breaks down in a monthly cycle gets reabsorbed in the body itself. It does not come out as waste blood flow like in humans. So it gets reabsorbed in the body itself, and then again they use the energy to build things, make blood cells and all. Then again when it breaks down, it gets reabsorbed. So there's no difference in estrous cycle and menstrual cycle. Estrous cycle is not as regulated and um, um, periodically punctual as menstrual cycle. Okay, because I told you, for many mammals, non-primate mammals, there is a breeding season. They do not keep breeding all the time. There comes a breeding season where females give birth to babies more than other, and that season is decided by abundance of nutrition in the wild. And if the environment is hostile, if there is no nutrition around, if it's going to be a peak summer or something like that, or a peak winter, then most probably they won't give birth to babies, because they know that babies won't have anything to eat, and they themselves won't have anything to eat and get nutrition for the developing embryos, right? So often there are breeding seasons in which they give birth. Those are favorable seasons, but humans can give birth any time of the year. Okay, so biologically they also can, if you force them to, or if there is a captive breeding, but in nature, in wild, their behavior is slightly different. Is that clear, Iram and Rabia? So the
Yes.
counterpart, estrous cycle, we are not going to talk about. We're going to talk about the menstrual cycle, because this is what we have to do in detail. It happens in primates, which is humans. Okay, now, are there other primates apart from humans? Are there other primates? Yes, no? Class 11th, you have studied primates. Are monkeys primates?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And which are the closest to humans at the moment on the planet? Which organisms are closest to humans in evolution?
Chimpanzee.
Chimpanzees. So chimps share uh, very vivid, like it's a very like terrific similarity with our genome, which is around 98%. So 98% of a chimp's genome is like a human genome. Whatever genes we have, they have. Whatever physiology we have, they have. Whatever disease we get, they get. Even if those are diseases like mental disorders like depression, schizophrenia, etc., etc., uh, they also have that. That 2% of the difference makes all the difference, makes us human and makes them chimpanzee. The second thing is also the cranial capacity. The Homo genus has the highest cranial capacity. Chimps do not have great cranial capacity, but they are amazing with memorizing stuffs. They can even learn language, specifically sign language. And there are huge studies on individual chimpanzees. Some of the famous one are Coco. You can go and find about Coco the chimp. So Coco used to talk to its trainer and through sign language, and Coco could convey things like Coco could talk about the time of the day, when the food is going to come, should I eat or not. Coco could also ask about other people in the vicinity. Like if someone doesn't come, he will ask that where is George, and all in sign language. And then the trainer will reply, and then he'll react to that. So this ability to converse is amazing, right? Um, we used to believe that humans are the only one gifted with this ability to understand, form language, and speak. Chimpanzees cannot speak as fluently as we can because of the reasons. One of the reasons is this development of the voice box. But chimps can make vocalizations of their own, and each vocalization means any sound, a different kind of sound, and like hoo ha ha kind of sounds, and they can make different sounds uh, uh, like ascribed to different objects or emotions or questions or things like that. But sign languages, they learn very fast. For example, you teach them about who are you, and like, and or what is the time. So this, like if you go over your wrist as a watch to ask what is the time, so they will learn that and they will ask you what is the time. That's what Coco used to do. So figure out about chimps who have been trained and who have been studied. So they're very close to us. So my question is, do you think chimps also undergo menstruation? Do chimp females menstruate? What do you think? Do chimps menstruate? Yes, they do. Okay. Monkeys and chimps undergo menstruation just like humans because they are also primates, but not all primates. There are certain primates that do not have a full-fledged menstrual cycle like humans, chimps, and monkeys. But the closest to humans, which are chimps and then the old world monkeys, they menstruate. Okay, so you can write it down. And again, they can also give birth at any given time of the year, unlike elephants, cows, dogs, and cats. Is that clear? Chimps and monkeys can also menstruate.
Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about menstrual cycle. Now, few things first as points. You should remember that menstrual cycle is roughly of around 28 days. Okay, this is the duration. So it goes better with the lunar calendar, but not the monthly 1 month that is decided by Gregorian or the Christian calendar that we follow. So it's around 28 days. And this is divided into phases. The first phase is called the bleeding phase. Actually, we have, because now we call it first, because the way we study, or the easiest way a female can spot a menstrual cycle is the first day when bleeding starts. So spotting the blood is where they start realizing that menstrual cycle has started. So that's why we also call it the first phase, bleeding phase, which is also known as the menstrual phase, and it is around from day 1 to day 5 on an average. It varies with physiology. Some females only spot bleeding for like 3 days, sometimes 4 to 5 days. And in some minority females, the bleeding phase is even extended to 7 days. Now, the how it is distributed and how it varies depends on the physiology, the health, and the condition of the female. If it is 7 day long, often the bleeding is it picks up from day 3. Day 4 it is at the peak, and then comes back to comes down in day 5, 6, and by the day 7 it goes away. Some females that only have the bleeding phase, vigorous bleeding phase for 3 days, 3 to 5 days, the peak is the second and the third day, and then it comes down. But since they are bleeding for less time, does not mean they will also bleed less amount of blood. That's not correlated. They may bleed out more and more vigorously. Some females undergo more pain and discomfort during this phase than others. So it all depends on physiology to physiology, but to study biology we have to standardize things to understand the mechanisms. So we call that bleeding phase is mostly 1 to 5 days, followed by the phase in which uterus is formed, which is called proliferative phase. Okay, so bleeding was breakdown and removal of all the waste. Proliferative phase is from day 16th to 13, sorry, day 6 to 13. And then the third one is post ovulatory phase. So day 14 is the exact day in this 28 day cycle, also the middle day, on which ovulation happens from the ovaries. Now, uterus, this I'm talking about uterus at the moment. Bleeding happens in uterus, proliferation happens in uterus, and all these things. But ovulation happens from the ovary. Remember secondary oocyte that releases this thing. Oh, sorry, this thing. So this happens exactly on 14th day. And in almost all the females, this is the most reliable event that does not have much of variation. Even if someone has a 3 to 5 days bleeding, 7 days bleeding, but around 14th day, every female will release secondary oocyte from the ovaries. So the third will be the post ovulatory phase. We will talk in detail about these phases, and this is from 15th to 28th day. 14th is missing from the menstrual cycle of the uterus, because on 14th uterus does only waits for ovulation, which happens from the ovaries. Okay, so these two are called pre-ovulatory phase, bleeding, and this one, and then post-ovulatory phase. Is that clear, Iram, Rabia? Yes, no?
Yes.
Yeah. Also, the thing that you have to remember, keep in mind, because things will get slightly complicated from this point onward, but we will go a little slow but strong. This is happening in uterus. Menstrual cycle happens, menses happens in uterus, but uterus always work in sync with ovaries. And how is this sync maintained? You know the answer already. How, what can help in a crosstalk between uterus and ovaries? Rabia, how can two different organs work in sync?
By releasing hormone.
Perfect, by releasing hormones, because hormones are called messengers, chemical messengers, right? So ovaries and uterus are in sync and work together to complete this cycle, monthly cycle, by hormones, because ovary releases some hormone that go and act on uterus, right? Yes or no? So in a way, ovary through estrogen and progesterone can keep talking to uterus. Make sense, Iram and Rabia?
Yes.
So whenever we will talk about menstrual cycle, we are going to take both ovary and uterus together. But first we will study them separately to understand what's happening. Okay. So let's begin. Okay. Much time. Go up here. Okay. Now we'll make a graph. Okay. So close your books, close your NCRTs, and help me make this graph. So on y-axis, we will take two things simultaneously. Let's divide this graph in two halves. The upper half is for ovary, the ovarian cycle. The lower half is for uterus. Okay. Now we will study four things. First thing that we will study. Okay, and it starts at, this is day 0. Oh, let's not take 0 because 0 doesn't make sense. Day 1. Then in the middle will be day 14, which you know is ovulation day, correct? And then day 28. Same here. 1, 14, let's say 28. And we will study four things. First, we will talk about, so which hormones act on ovary? Tell me. Which hormones act on ovary? Pituitary hormones, right? Hormones from
Yes.
pituitary.
Yes.
So we will talk about levels of pituitary, Pituita, pituitary hormone levels. Second thing, we will talk about the, what is the effect. So ovarian cycle or we call it events. What is happening in the ovary because of these hormones. The third thing we will talk about is what acts on uterus. Brain secretes something, it acts on
Hormones.
ovaries. Ovaries secrete something, it acts on uterus. So what we'll call them?
Hormone.
Which hormone? Just hormone. Ovarian
Ovarian
hormone.
hormone.
Yes. So we will talk about ovarian hormones, their levels. So basically we're talking about levels here. Levels. And because of these hormones, what is happening at uterus? So I will call it uterine events or uterine cycle. Okay, is it clear? Okay. Okay, let's start. So first, I will also draw a line here. You people can use scale. My limitation is that I don't want to waste time in that, but I think a version of this diagram is also present in your textbooks, but before we go that, let's make our own and understand. So what are pituitary hormones? Tell me.
FSH and LH.
FSH. So I will use green for FSH and let's use red for LH. Is it clear? Now, let's try to divide these days in the uterine events. Okay, everything is on the screen. You can see the whole screen together, right? That is my whole purpose. Can you all see the whole screen together?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So we know already that from day 1 to, let's say, this is 14, so the middle will be 7 somewhere here, so around day 5. So from day 1 to day 5, we know it's called bleeding phase, right? And so let's mark it here. It's called the bleeding phase or menstruation. Menstruation, in which there is bleeding. And then from 6 to 14, this phase is called proliferative phase, or also called as follicular phase. Why follicular? Because the name follicular comes from the ovary, because there are follicles that are developing, right? Primary oocyte, secondary oocyte, and then on 14th day they will release. So follicular phase, or with respect to uterus, what is happening? Proliferation is happening, so called proliferative phase. Then from 16th day onward, it becomes luteal phase. Again, luteal phase is with respect to the ovaries, where secondary oocyte is released, and whatever is left behind is called Graafian follicle or corpus luteum. We will talk about it in some time. And with respect to uterus, it is called secretory phase, because some secretions start taking place in the uterus. And then from 28th day onward comes the next cycle, given that there is no pregnancy. If there is a pregnancy, then this cycle stops for the next around a year or so. Like till 9 months, there will be baby developing, then there is birth. And even after birth, for another 4 to 6 months, there is no menstrual cycle. Okay, we will talk about why later on, but we divided the phases. Is it clear? Now let's start with FSH. So day 1 of uterus is where bleeding starts, right? So when bleeding starts, the levels of LH and FSH are very low. So this is the level of LH. Till day 5, it stays very low. Also the level of FSH, if you see, this also stays very low. Is it clear? Iram, Rabia?
Yeah.
Now, because of these low levels of FSH, low levels of FSH and LH, what is happening in the ovary is that in terms of ovarian cycles, there will be in this first 5 days development of primary follicle. So inside the ovary, FSH and LH is low from the brain. So the development of primary follicle is just picking up. Okay. Ovarian hormones. So what are ovaries releasing? We have to take another two colors. Let me take one pink for what are the ovarian hormones? Tell me quickly.
Estrogen and progesterone.
Yes, so I will use estrogen, purple, and what should I use? Yellow? If it is visible. Is it visible?
Yes.
Progesterone. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So let me first go through one at a time. So levels of FSH stays low till 5 days. They actually continue to stay low. Okay. Then the baseline till around day 14th. And just before day 14th, around day 12 when it comes, they shoot up. They shoot up to make a peak at day 14. And then again from day 15 onwards, they start to come down, down, down. And by day 28, they're back to baseline. LH again behaves in the same manner as FSH. It stays low and it also picks and peaks at day 14, but its peak is lower than FSH always. FSH has a higher peak, has a higher concentration. Fleas, and then again, this also comes down, slightly fluctuates, but okay. So this peak is at day 14. Is it clear? And this is where inside the ovary, the development of primary follicles to secondary follicle to tertiary follicle, and we will talk about follicles later. On day 14 happens ovulation. Secondary oocyte is released. And then around this time, after the ovulation has happened, it is called development of corpus luteum. We will talk in detail what is corpus luteum. Corpus luteum is the leftover packaging material of secondary oocyte. So when secondary oocyte is released, the whole Graafian follicle in which it was packed is left. And from that point onward, so this tertiary follicle, which I have written here, is actually called Graafian follicle. In this Graafian follicle is packed your secondary oocyte. So it releases, Graafian follicle is left back, and that's called corpus luteum because it's now degenerating and dying, and it after some time it degenerates. So it's called development of corpus luteum and then degeneration or regression of CL, corpus luteum. So the events are clear. At day 28, it degenerates completely and a new cycle begins. So the other ovary chooses another follicle, start developing it into primary, secondary, tertiary, releases secondary oocyte, develops corpus luteum, and then corpus luteum degenerates. Make sense? The ovarian cycle makes sense? The overall?
Yes.
Now let's see what's happening in, what color did we choose? Estrogen. Okay. What's happening in the ovarian hormone? Now, the levels of estrogen and progesterone. Primary follicles secrete estrogen. What do they secrete?
Estrogen.
So their levels to begin with are low, but starts to increase and they increase and they reach the peak. So let me draw a line, dotted line, which goes through all the day 14 of all the cycles. just for a reference. So this level reaches its peak just before ovulation and comes down. Okay. And then again starts to pick up a little bit towards the end, but comes down then. So this is estrogen. Estrogen peak comes around day 12. Is it clear?
Yeah.
Because as the follicles develop, estrogen level keeps increasing because these follicles are producing estrogen. The moment ovulation happens, before that this follicle has released secondary oocyte and starts to regress, and then estrogen level starts coming down. So you will see two peaks, but one peak is not very prominent. So actually I should not make it this prominent. The other peak is like a plateau peak like this. Okay, this could be a little cleaner, I believe. Just to tell you, the peak is around day 12. Now let's see what happens to progesterone. Progesterone stays very low, lower than estrogen, because progesterone, let me give you a hint, is secreted by two kind of tissues. One is the embryo which forms placenta. After implantation, placenta secretes progesterone. But here we are just talking about the cycle, so no pregnancy. So in this cycle, progesterone is secreted by corpus luteum. So when do you think progesterone level to come up? Before day 14 or after day 14?
After.
Yes. So progesterone stays low, no secretion till day 14, a flat line till day 14. And after day 14, as development of corpus luteum begins, progesterone level starts rising and it reaches a peak here. And if there is no pregnancy, then regression of corpus luteum will happen and progesterone levels will now decrease again. So both of them will come back to the baseline and day 1 of the cycle will again begin. And at this, because of these hormones, so this peak is in the middle of the luteal or the secretory phase. Okay. And what's happening in the uterus is, you already know, here is menses or bleeding, and then in this phase it leads to what you call proliferation or reformation of endometrium. So menses and bleeding means endometrium breaking down and everything going out. Proliferation of endometrium means everything starts to form up again. Then ovulation happens, and beyond ovulation, what happens is endometrium thickens around 2 to 3 times in this secretory phase, and then again breakdown of endometrium starts to take place, and then there is the next cycle which comes back to day 1. Is this clear?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So now let me tell you some entrance questions that has come from this part quickly. The first question is, write down which is the most important pre-ovulatory ovarian hormone. which is the most important pre-ovulatory ovarian hormone? It is estrogen. Okay, is it clear?
Yes, sir.
So it is predominant before ovulation, and then we have progesterone, which is predominant after ovulation. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
So have you drawn this, Rabia?
Yes, I did.
Okay, now go back to NCRT, read this part, and match these two diagrams. Try to understand what we studied today. Are you able to understand it from NCRT? And then we'll come back, and in the class day after tomorrow, we will talk in detail about the ovaries, what is happening in the ovary, the events in the ovary, and what is happening in the uterus later on. Just let me admit Iram. Iram is joined in. Yes, hello Iram.
So sorry, sir. Connection is unstable.
Yes. So I'll just repeat for you what I think you logged out when we were talking about uterine events, right? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So post ovulation is called so endometrium starts to thickens. It it become 2 to 3 times thick as it was in the proliferative phase. Secretion also, glands also develop and they start secreting things. This is what I was talking about, the uterine secretions. We will talk about it later on Wednesday. Then breakdown of endometrium begins as progesterone level starts to decrease, and then the next cycle begins, which is again day 1 of the menses. Okay, and I was just telling Rabia that what are the questions that are asked in entrance from this part. So some of the questions that are repeated multiple times are: estrogen is the most important hormone before ovulation. In the pre-ovulatory phase, estrogen is the most predominant hormone. Is it clear, Kiran?
So sorry, I didn't hear the question.
The question is which hormones are predominant in which period. So estrogen is the most predominant hormone before ovulation. Pre-ovulation phase, estrogen is the most important hormone. Is it clear?
Yeah.
Progesterone is the most important hormone after ovulation in the post-ovulatory phase. And as you can understand by the events and the hormone, progesterone is also the hormone which is important to maintain the endometrium thickness and the layers. Because you can see when the level of progesterone is the highest, at this period, endometrium thickens 2 to 3 times. Correct?
Yes.
And when the levels of progesterone starts to decrease again, the breakdown of endometrium begins. Correct?
Yeah.
And throughout the menses, when it is breaking down and bleeding out, the level of progesterone is very low. And then the proliferation of endometrium begins with estrogen. So to proliferate, estrogen is important to start making it back again. But to maintain the thickness, progesterone is important. Okay, so to initiate the building of endometrium, estrogen is important, but to maintain that thickness, to maintain the endometrium, progesterone is important. And if you think, let me give you a thought question. This is a question that comes. Let me use another color. I will use a lighter shade of yellow. If at this point after ovulation, from day 14th to day 18th, these 4 or 5 days are very crucial days and the most susceptible, most opportunistic days for fertilization to happen. Okay, this is the time where females can conceive the best and become pregnant. So from day 14th to 20, let's say, in these 1 week, if there is fertilization, then that layer of uterus will be required for the next 9 months, right? Yes or no?
Yeah.
So you will expect, and you are right if you are expecting the right thing, that the level of progesterone should be maintained in the female blood. So this stays up. Can you see this yellow thing that I'm using? Not really, right? You can? Can you see this? I don't think so. Let me use red then. So this is the level of progesterone if pregnancy occurs. So the peak stays for 9 months. Okay? Because progesterone is very important to maintain the endometrium thickness, and the baby is now attached to that thickness, thick wall. If progesterone goes down, miscarriage will happen. That is how miscarriages, or even after implantation, if they found medical termination of pregnancy, they found that the baby has some defects or the mother will not live if the baby grows and develops, then medically the pregnancy is terminated by doctors, by legal procedures. So that is called the medical termination, commonly known as abortion. For that, you need to drop down progesterone levels so that endometrium comes down.